Good afternoon. Welcome to the weekly edition of The Wrap. I'm Laura Leslie, WRAL Capitol Bureau Chief.
And I'm Brian Murphy, WRAL reporter.
Reporter of all sorts, right? Sports, investigative, and occasionally political. We're glad you could join us this week.
Whatever it takes.
Yeah, well, lots going on in your world this week and next week. But of course, for us this week, it's just a little thing called the primary countdown going on. We're 3 days out, I guess. Well, 4, I guess you'd say, Friday. And it shows. We've had visits this week from Harris. Kamala Harris is today. And then over the weekend, we've got Nikki Haley coming to Raleigh. I'll be going to that one. And we've got Donald Trump going to Greensboro.
Yeah, I'm really I don't think there's any doubt about who's going to win the primary on Wednesday or Tuesday. Pardon me. Donald Trump's going to win. I think what we're looking for is the margin of victory. How well does Haley do? And what I'm interested in, and it would be interesting if we can get this, the people who vote for Haley, are they willing to vote for Trump, or are they willing to vote for Biden, or are they willing to sit it out? Like what are they going to do in the general if it's Biden versus Trump, as we all suspect? What are these Haley voters going to do?
You know, that's a really good question. And I noticed looking at some of the results that we saw in South Carolina, for example, Haley took the independents 60-40. So the question is, do those independent voters show up on the election day? And if they do who do they vote for?
It's something I wrote about last week. Robert Kennedy is trying to get on the ballot here in North Carolina. And it seems likely he's trying to get a different party on the ballot, and the threshold to get another party on the ballot is much lower. It does seem like they should be able to reach that. Do people go vote for Kennedy? I think there's a lot of variables in this general election in a way that maybe there hasn't been for a while.
Yeah, I have a feeling the third party vote's going to be bigger than it's been in the past, because I think there's a lot of people who just do not want to see what we know we're going to see at this point. But yeah, here we are. So anyway, all right. So as of Friday afternoon, we're a little bit behind 2020 early voting. Republicans are definitely coming out more than Democrats because there's a lot more Republican primaries that are more contested. A big party gap with men versus women voters in the primary. Women are pulling ballots 51% Democrats, 49% Republicans. Men are 60% polling the Republican and 40% polling the Democrat.
I think we've seen this in the age of Trump. There's become a pronounced gender gap in our politics, with women, aligning more with Democrats, and men of all races aligning more with Republicans. I think that's one of the hopes for the Trump administration or for the Trump campaign, that they can win African American males, Hispanic males, that even though those racial groups tend to vote heavily Democratic, if they can peel off the men in those groups, then they would have a much better chance of winning. Certainly, Trump's carried North Carolina twice already.
Sure, absolutely. So anyway, I want to give credit for those stats that I just gave you to Michael Bitzer. Professor Michael Bitzer, the great.
Couldn't do anything without Michael Bitzer.
Well, and by the way, we certainly couldn't have done On the Record this week. So he and Chris Cooper, who was here from Western Carolina, both of them were in town for an event, so we were able to grab both of them in studio, which we never get to see each other in person, right? So they were here this week. So that should be a fun OTR this week. That's going to be Will Doran also sat in with that with me on that. So that'll be on at 7 o'clock on Saturday night. If you missed it, you can always find it online. Also, I should mention election night. We will be on all the time on WRAL.plus, probably News Plus, and then also at 10 and 11.
And on digital. Many of us will be here in the office updating those digital stories, so WRAL.com as well for all your election needs. And again, there are and I'm sure we're going to get to them, but there are a lot of contested races here in the Triangle that are going to be very important. Maybe not in the general election where it'll pretty well be decided, but that means that the primary is even more important.
Absolutely. The 13th race, the one that was 14 candidates. That's my story today. I mean, I basically had to say at the intro to my story, there's 14 candidates and we can't fit them all in this.
14 Republican candidates.
Yeah, that was just the Republicans, right?
Right.
So I think that is the biggest primary field in recent memory, at least for a congressional seat that we've had.
Yeah, the one that stands out is the one where Ted Budd won, I think, 16 candidates in sort of the Greensboro area, and that's how he got his start into Congress, won a contested primary.
But I think that 16 was Republicans and Democrats. This is just Republicans, right?
And this will decide who goes to Congress. This is a seat that is held by Wiley Nickel right now. The seat at the district has been changed dramatically to favor Republicans. And so whoever were to win this, or more likely, whoever were to win the runoff election, because it doesn't seem like somebody's going to get to 30% when there's that many candidates, is likely going to be the next member of Congress representing many of the people in our readership or viewership.
Yeah, and I do think also that the district I went and looked today, that district favored Trump by 17 points. in 2020. So, I mean, there's not a whole lot of suspense there. As you say, it will be settled at the primary level.
I live in Holly Springs. That district, along with the 4th district, are on opposite sides of Holly Springs Road. A 2-lane road that runs down the middle of Holly Springs. The 13th district is on one side of the road, and the 4th district is on the other.
I was bumming because I really wanted to vote in the 13th this year because it looks like the most fun race. And I was in the 13th district last year, but when they redrew it, they took Garner out of it. So I'm not. I live in Garner, so I got put into Deborah Ross's district where there's no suspense really there. So anyway, so let's talk a little bit about the other big thing that's going on this week, and that is sports betting.
Yeah, now we're talking.
Yeah, I mean, and so today was the first day, right?
Yeah, Friday the 1st was the first day. Well, let's go back. Thursday, operators got their licenses from the North Carolina Lottery Commission, and 8 of them, the 8 that we thought were going to get it, a lot of the biggest names in sports betting got their licenses. And then today, Friday, they were allowed to accept customers. Customers were allowed to sign up, register. You got to be 21, so you got to present a social security number. You got to present a driver's license or another state-issued ID. And then on the 13th, so we're not quite there yet, but on the 11th, I should know this date. On March 11th will be the first day that you can actually place wagers online. Caesars has been able to accept some online bets up on Cherokee Land in far western North Carolina, but that's a special situation. For everybody else, the majority of people statewide, March 11th is the day, and there's a lot of promos out there right now. A lot of those free bet offers that we heard about, we're going to come to North Carolina, are here. It is an interesting time, and I've just been working on many different aspects of this story. I think it's fascinating as a government story, as a sports story, as a addiction story, and I think we're going to get into some of that later. There are just so many angles to this story, and it's how many different aspects of our life is it going to touch?
Right. Well, let's take a break just for 1 second here to hear from our sponsor. Let's hope that we have one, and we'll be back just on the other side here. Welcome back to this week's wrap. NC Capital, Laura Leslie here with Brian Murphy, talking about the big sports betting coming up. A couple weeks now. Got to go make. I need to learn a lot about gambling. I have no idea what some of these terms mean. I don't. It's a whole new world.
It is. And I think what's interesting is that there's so many, I think there are a lot of people, particularly maybe in my age cohort or maybe a little younger than me, I'm getting up there, who are very into this. I mean, males, 18 or 21 to 40 is really their target demographic here. And it does strike me. I've talked to some people who know, the odds for a 3-team teaser off the top of their head, and then other people who look at me crazy when I talk about the spread of a game. It's one of these issues where there is such a strange knowledge imbalance among the population. I've been trying to think of other issues that where some of the population is so heavily invested, and then some of the population could care less, will never even go to these sites. It's really strange. Many issues touch all of us: schools, education funding, even an election really kind of touches everyone. This is an issue where 90% of the population is very casual, if at all. But 10% of the population,
very passionate.
Yeah, cares deeply, deeply, deeply.
Very passionate. Anyway, a little bit more on the election coming up. We should mention a couple of stories this week. Number one, the launch of a new parody website called Mark Rottenson, and this was by we learned that this was funded by a local millionaire, Todd Stiefel, who is also a film producer and a Democratic donor and a atheist activist, I guess you would say, and it is a send up in the most thorough sense possible of Mark Robinson. There is a section where it's using AI to kind of sound like him, and there's been some pushback about that from Robinson's campaign and even from Stein.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the more interesting parts that Josh Stein kind of came out in defense of his likely general election opponent. I think AI is maybe the story of the election so far. We've seen all kinds of AI-generated ads or AI-generated voices. I think people are maybe more attuned to that stuff right now. And I can only imagine it's going to get worse and worse as we get into the general election.
Yeah. And then also a story this week about 13th Republican primary candidate Brad Knott having not changed his voting address. One of our colleagues did that story. It's really good. You should go find it on NC Capitol. It doesn't look like it mattered to any necessary election, right? But, I mean, it's still interesting.
Well, and others in that race have taken to blasting that out on social media and blasting it out in text alerts as well. So it has resonated a little bit. And Brad Knott is a former federal prosecutor. You'd think you
would know the law,
You
right?
would think he would be up to date on some of the voting laws. And it's weird because voting laws have gotten so much attention, right? So much. Is there fraud happening? Are these, people are voting out of district, mail-in ballots, dead people voting? So it's interesting when it pops up and there's a documented case of somebody voting at the wrong address.
Yeah. So just a reminder, if you are voting absentee, you do not get a 3-day grace period anymore. This year, it has to be there at the Board of Elections by 7:30 on election night. So you might have to walk it in by hand. Otherwise, just want to mention over at the legislature this week, there was some action. A lot of folks on the hot seat this week. To start with, it was the Division or Department of Military and Veterans Affairs who got called on the carpet by the Oversight General Government Committee looking at why the Fayetteville Veterans Home was closed and how quickly it was closed and what the reasoning was that we had heard that the leadership over in that department wants to basically level it and start over because the repairs on this only 24-year-old facility is going to be almost as much as a brand new facility, or the state's share, I should say, of a brand new facility. So gotta walk back a little bit there. We got, we heard from the folks from the department. It's like, well, we haven't made that decision just yet,
Veterans care is such a big issue. When I covered Congress, I mean, what I'm not going to give you the big spiel about what these people do for our country and then the way they're treated, but the fact that these facilities where they have to live, not only veterans but active duty, and we've heard all the news about the burn pits and cancer and Camp Lejeune and the toxic chemicals. It's really, I think, an undercovered story how many health exposures that these veterans have.
Well, and also to add to this, that particular home had a memory care unit, and having gone through this with family members, memory care is hard to find and it's very, very expensive. So I'm sure that was a huge burden lifted off of some families of some service members who were able to stay there, but they've had to be relocated. So anyway, that's a whole saga that is, I don't think that's anywhere near being done yet, right? So keep your ears posted for that one. Keep your ears, so I should say, tuned into that one. Also, a rough week for the DMV, Division of Motor Vehicles. Wayne Goodwin on the hot seat for 3 hours. 3 hours yesterday.
Everyone hates the DMV. Everyone
hates the DMV. And, it's funny, Goodwin brought in, a lot of people with him to provide the answers that lawmakers said they wanted. It is interesting that Goodwin and his staff prepared this really massive PowerPoint presentation to sort of answer the questions that they've gotten, and lawmakers wouldn't even let him give it. So they were just grilling him. They're grilling him about customer service. They're grilling him about the third-party tag agencies and how come some of them are getting shut down and how that whole thing works. And then they got back to there was that little conflict between lawmakers and Goodwin about the 8-year licenses that got extended to 16 and who asked for that. Because apparently that was initially in a DMV ask. The DMV decided not to ask for it, but it was still sort of out there floating around and it ended up in the budget. But it's illegal to do that. And Carl Ford basically told Goodwin, he says, well, here we are, somebody's throwing us under the bus, blaming lawmakers, and we were told it was you, so what are we going to do here?
A lot of CYA, it sounds like, going on down there.
Yeah.
What's amazing, and I know the DMV has a horrible reputation. So much has gone online. I've been able to register my cars, get tags, all that stuff online. So it does seem like maybe they're trying to make some benefits, but if you ever have to go wait in line at a DMV, it takes forever. And if you're a working person, it's really difficult.
Well, Goodwin said they've made a lot of progress on hiring. They've used some of the change, the increases in salary to get some more people in, so that's helped. But it interested me that he talked about a million transactions were done online. But there's 8 million people with credentials, right? So I guess, I do it online, you do it online, but there's probably kind of a divide in terms of the people who are going into these places versus the people who are doing it online. And, it is really, you can't get an appointment for months.
Yeah.
I have friends who have kids who are trying to get their licenses, and it's just it's crazy.
Yeah, a lot of these services. I ran into this trying to get passports. You had to make reservations in Benson and do it, months out. All of these services, I do wonder after the pandemic, people decided, I'm not going back to that kind of job. Or maybe they had vacancies even before that, and now they're really struggling to fill it.
Goodwin said they lost half the staff during the pandemic. Half their staff. That is crazy.
That's amazing.
He also said that we've added 3 million people, but only 3 bureaus, 3 DMV bureaus. So it's like, that they do deal with more of the public than pretty much anything else in state government, except maybe Department of Revenue. That's about it.
Right. I do wonder, was there talk of privatization?
Yeah, a little bit. And that is something that they had sort of, Michael Lazzara had sort of put this out there last week that, that legislators had funded the study of it that's being done by the fiscal research folks, the staff over there. There was a lot of talk yesterday about, what kind of private-public partnerships do we have here? But if you really look into the issue, it's very complicated because these, the DMV interfaces with like voting records, right? I mean, think about how crazy we are to make sure those are secure, right? You're going to give access to those to a business, and there's drivers. Criminal records,
right?
Something else. I mean, there's a lot of sensitive material that the DMV either it manages or is privy to that would really complicate life to privatize. Doesn't mean it can't be done, but just saying. I think that is just about it for us this week. Of course, the election is Tuesday. If you haven't voted yet, please do.
Yeah, and we mentioned the 13th district. There's a pretty interesting Republican race in the 1st district.
Oh, yeah.
With Don Davis is likely to be the Democratic candidate and the incumbent, but between Lori Buckout and Sandy Smith. There's also an interesting race in the 6th district where Addison McDowell has gotten Donald Trump's endorsement, but Mark Walker is running a strong campaign, it looks like, and some other candidates in that race have gotten other endorsements as well. And so that's a multi-Republican candidate race as well in what is now Kathy Manning's district, but will be a Republican district in November.
And down in Charlotte, you've got, in Dan Bishop's old seat, you've got Mark Harris coming back, trying to make his political comeback after his 2018, the involvement in the ballot fraud. He's going up against John Bradford, who's going for that district. It'll be interesting to see. And then over couple districts over, we've got Gray Mills, another legislator, going up for a district against Pat Harrigan, who's kind of another MAGA sort of person. So it'll be really interesting to see how these primaries turn out.
It's shocking to me how the Mark Harris involvement has been memory hold, and he's just back as a credible candidate and a plausible congressperson after all that fiasco that we went through 6 years ago now.
Right. That's forever now.
We have short memories. We have short memories.
Forever. Anyway, everybody have a great weekend. Get out there and vote. If you haven't, you can vote Saturday until 3 o'clock, early voting, and of course all day on Tuesday. And we will catch you next week here on The Wrap. Thanks for listening.